The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope everyone is having an exceptional day, and thank you for joining our webinar. Today we have Rich Turner, who is our VP of Strategic Marketing and Business Development. Are you migrating to Exchange 2013 or Office 365? Well, don't forget your data. And today we're going to show you exactly why PST files are the hidden threat to your next project. We're going to go ahead and begin the webinar. And at the end of the webinar, there'll be a link that'll be sent out to everybody. We also will be having a Q&A session. All questions can be entered in the dialog box to the right, and we'll start to go through those at the end of the presentation.
Thank you, Crystal, and thanks everyone for joining us. This is a recap of a webinar that we recently hosted with guest speaker Steve Goodman, who is a Microsoft MVP with extensive experience handling migrations to Exchange Online, and our own Peter Mullins, who is the product manager for C2C's PST Enterprise. And thanks to their extensive notes, I can take you through what these two gentlemen discussed, and we're confident that this webinar will help you put your own PST management strategy together. Why worry about PSTs? Of course, if you're attending this webinar, you probably already have the answer to that question, but let's explore why this is an issue in a little more detail. IT is ultimately the data custodian for any company, and nobody else can do it or has the tools to do it or the understanding to do it. The issue with being a data custodian is at some point, somewhere, you're going to be asked to find this data, and when that occurs, do you even know where to look? The risk is nowhere more apparent than with a PST file. Their contents aren't readily available when you're searching for the data. So when you're performing an email migration, it's a very different animal than what you're used to an upgrade. Even though the rest of the company might think of this as just a new email platform, the business owner's expectations is often something very different. In large migrations, there's often an expectation that this new platform will help become a particular headache. So let's take a closer look at migrating to an online Exchange environment where the PST issue is Exchange. There really are few differences evident to the end user whether their Exchange is located on-premise or located in the cloud. Either choice, or even if you have a hybrid of the two, is going to offer broad storage and access features that simply weren't available when the PST format was created. In other words, email has evolved beyond the PST file itself. So Exchange Online is actually an attractive offering for many companies, and it's been designed around the idea of large mailboxes and significant resiliency. Now, to give you an example, Exchange Online offers you 50 gigabytes of mailbox storage per licensed user, another 10 gigabytes of shared mailboxes, and over 100 gigabytes of active per mailbox of archival storage in their, say, Plan 2 for E3 or E4 users. But even better, Exchange Online uses DAG technology, or DAG, to provide multi-data center resiliency, whether this is simply across country or across different countries. So Exchange 2013 and Exchange Online, since they share much of the same code and they're built on the same features that first appeared in Exchange 2010, some of their benefits include an auto reseed for JBOT. In other words, you have the ability to take just a bunch of disks and use a tattooing scheme that is going to make them look to Exchange like one big continuous disk. It's far easier to deploy multi-site environments. Microsoft has provided its own in-place legal hold. And finally, Exchange Online in 2013 leveraged the rest of the Microsoft architecture, which is going to give you a bigger mailbox and ultimately better resilience. However, big mailboxes are a feature, but the bigger question is, what do you use them for? Since Microsoft is no longer going to provide seamless access For PST files, the answer would seem obvious. Migrate everything into Exchange, and users suddenly have one single data place for all their data. Files go away. Everybody's happy. If it were only that simple. You need to determine very early on that you're ensuring that you migrate all the data you're going to need in the future for compliance and eDiscovery. Neither Exchange 2013 nor Exchange Online is going to do this for you. This is a very significant task, and unfortunately, it's left up to the IT organization. So I think this slide says it all. Your migration is going to fail if you end up leaving data behind. The issue with PST files is their containers. They have potentially thousands of email items and are going to require the same data management rules as live inboxes and other data in Exchange. You're going to need to retain it. You may be deleting it per a particular time schedule, and if you're keeping it, you ultimately need to know and make sure that retention is both secure and discoverable. And attorneys long ago learned that PST files need to be on their list of eDiscovery items since relevant information may be locked away in these containers. So you will be asked to find relative data in PSTs. So for all these reasons, it's probably best to deal with the PST issue now, because it's going to be far harder to do it after your migration or your data project has been completed. So the big problem is, where are PSTs? And the very appeal of this file that you could create it easily, you could store it anywhere, they're ubiquitous. They're everywhere. They're on desktops, they're on laptops, they're on old PCs, they're on your home directory, they're on your network shares, they're on USB drives, they're sneakerware. Basically, they're any location to which a user can copy a file. Big problem, yeah. PSTs aren't easy to track down, even if you have an idea where they are. Users often treated PST files as personal filing systems. Yeah, they often duplicated files, and very frequently it was intentional. Very few companies mandated any type of PST management, and even if they did, it was really impossible to enforce it. And a lot of medium and large-sized companies will say, yeah, we have a PS problem. We think we know, well, we know, but we don't know the scale. We just know it's big. If you're going to recreate a user's environment in Exchange Online, like it or not, you're going to be duplicating data. And really, this isn't an issue as far as storage goes, but it's going to be a big issue finding all the PST data and moving it up there. Oh, yeah, that's right. Microsoft does offer a free tool for managing PSTs called PST Capture, but not so fast. PST Capture is very limited, it's very manual, and it only migrates PSTs. It doesn't deal with the overall problem. Even if you do migrate all of that PST data into an online environment, what are you going to do now with the useless PST files? To get rid of them, you've got to rediscover them all over again. PST Capture doesn't do it. And if you simply leave them hanging around, you have big legal and compliance risks. So you're going to have to discover these things anyway, even though you've gone through all this work to get rid of them. There's some other problems with PST Capture that you need to know about. First of all, it's an unsupported tool from Microsoft. It's hard to configure. It has a client-side agent, which itself is challenging because the users have to install it. And there's no ability to troubleshoot it. So if it doesn't work and you based your PST migration on that, what are you going to do next? There are some other options. And all of these except the last one are even worse. You can ask users to copy data into their new mailboxes. Very surprising, some large companies have done this or tried to do this, and I don't have to tell anybody in the room that the results were disastrous. You could go out and visit every desktop, collect and label all the locally stored PCs, and then mount them to a multi-central location. Now, personally, this only sounds like a good idea if your company has multiple locations and they're all in desirable places like Hawaii. You can write your own scripts to find PSTs and move them around, but then again, you're an IT shop, not a development organization. And it sounds great, but ditto for trying to import PSTs using native functionality in Exchange. It's a very incomplete solution, which surprises a lot of people. And the final option, like I said, is the best one. find a third-party solution. And for a large company, not only is this the best option, it's also the most cost-effective. And we'd like to talk about that next. What tools you use and how you use them is part and parcel of your overall migration plan. So, you're migrating PSTs. Why you're doing it is going to have a lot to do with the tools and strategies you use this. If you're upgrading to Exchange 2013, it's an opportunity to utilize their large mailboxes and eliminate the ongoing PST issues forever. But you might not want to move everything, so why not take the opportunity to enforce your corporate retention policies, because there's going to be stuff in those PSTs that goes back to when cars had fins. If you're migrating to Exchange Online, it's a similar issue but a much more significant one. Instead of moving file contents on premise, you're doing it over a network connection. Suddenly the world is a lot more complicated. If you aren't managing virtual desktop interface, or VDI, each user is going to expect a device-independent experience. So you might not be migrating PSTs at all. You might instead be moving them to a central location and simply changing the pointers within Exchange, something these third-party tools do pretty well. Or finally, you might be some of the people we speak with where PSTs really aren't part of a project, but instead there's been a directive from one of the corner offices to get rid of them. This is often the legal department, usually after some particularly painful eDiscovery exercise, and the statement is simply, clean these things up. Each of the reasons above might require different tools and different strategies. So let's look at this. The first question you have to understand is how labor tolerant is your project? And a manual process, which is ITs and end users, makes sense, but only if it's a handful of files. If you're asking the users to identify and move their own PSTs, it's a strategy you may come to regret. The users don't know how to do it, they have other priorities, and like it or not, you're going to be forced to do this for many of them. This can quickly become an open-ended process, and if you're doing a migration to Exchange Online, it's going to stop you cold in your tracks. You can use free software. There's Microsoft's PST Capture. I consider it the tool of choice, but there are some others in the freeware space at all. The problem with all of them is automation and scale. They don't locate the PST files for you. They don't delete PSTs after migration, nor do they handle exception cases like orphan files, and that can be 10 to 20% of your total PST environment. Again, there's going to be a lot of manual effort, a lot of additional hours, consultants, temp help, temporary people, and if you have a large-scale project, the cost adds up. Or you can use a third-party tool, and there's several companies who offer these products. They're all designed to scale. They're all designed to eliminate as much manual effort as possible. Each takes a slightly different approach to handling PSTs. In the balance of the presentation, we're going to talk about what you ought to expect in a third-party software product and how the design in each of these impacts the way they function. So what's a third-party software product going to give you? There's three distinct steps to a migration, and the third-party softwares are all designed to automate these to varying degrees, locating them, migrating them, and finally eliminating them. Locating PST files is a challenge because by their nature, while most IT departments know how to look, example, end user devices, network locations, whatever, the problem is how to look for them. It can be lengthy and challenging. Therefore, PST migration software typically relies on one of two different methods to locate these locally stored files. They can either deploy an agent or they utilize some kind of script. Most of the third parties use an agent, which sounds like a good idea until you try to deploy these across a larger organization because the agent is going to need to be installed. And in many cases, the end user is going to be involved and permission has to be granted to install the agent. If for some reason the agent doesn't install, that desktop or laptop remains invisible. What C2C did was we picked a different route that we require no agent. Instead, PST migration occurs as part of a script which can be pushed out and enabled when a desktop or laptop logs in or even powers up. So this runs in memory, runs in background, there's no user involvement, and they don't even know what's happening. This is a screenshot that shows C2C's PST Enterprise screen can give up to 41 different PST attributes, but in this case it's showing how it can identify when PSTs were first discovered and then were last discovered. In other words, those PST files that weren't visible to the system for one reason or another, typically the desktop, say, hadn't been on the network, but now they've been found, or the flip side, they've suddenly disappeared. And the importance shouldn't be overlooked because in a large organization, there's always a core of employees who are mobile. You have to handle them as well. You also have three different aspects you need to consider when you're planning migration. Do you want to migrate all of the data or just a subset? Do you have sufficient resources, since migrations can require additional servers and temporary storage? And finally, if you're migrating to Exchange Online, do you have sufficient internet bandwidth, and how will you manage that bandwidth to the best of your resources? So let's look at these issues themselves a little bit further. Like we said before, PST is a local storage container. Users often don't even remember what they've stored in them, and in many cases, those files were created as part of Microsoft's Auto Archive feature. It was pre-configured as enabled prior to Exchange 2010. These are largely invisible to your corporate data management programs. So it's often the case that data within a user's PST file is well beyond your retention schedules. Now, you're going to move these from invisible and inexpensive local storage. You also have an opportunity to retroactively apply retention policies. It really makes very little sense to apply these policies after migrating, so nearly all of the third-party solutions have some kind of a tool to delete or expire PST data versus migrating the whole thing. Mostly these policies are going to be metadata-based, which is likely a good thing because it's going to be up to you to write the policy. But it's also an opportunity to apply a modicum of governance simply by applying your company's standard retention schedules. After all, this data wouldn't exist if it was still there in the live inbox. And this is very important to remember. If your legal department is mandated, we are only keeping files for 2 years, you can set that up as a field and not even migrate anything which is older. So, whose data? Now here's the interesting thing, but the question comes up, what's an orphan PST file? Simply any PST file which is disconnected from its original Outlook profile. And in some cases, these are just files that have been disconnected on an obvious owner's laptop. It's an easier situation to handle, but in other cases, these files belong to owners who are no longer employees. They may even be out of your Exchange directory. All of the third-party tools provide some mechanism to identify these orphans, but they aren't all created equal. The identification process for an orphan PST can only be automated by using algorithms, and these are going to determine the probable owner of the PST file. Now, most third-party software products rely on a simple matching algorithm. They're going to look for the most common owners in the commonly available metadata fields in the PST data. This is going to work in some cases, but you're still going to deal with numerous exception cases. Now, PST Enterprise uses multiple algorithms, so it's not just relying on the basic owner match. Ultimately, this means you can rely on the software to identify the logical owner and allow orphan identification to run as automatic process. So let's take a look at that. This is the PST Enterprise screen showing orphan assignment, and it's very flexible. You can set a threshold in case you want the identification to be fully automatic, or you want the system to flag only the significant outliers. Note that this relies on identifying the mailbox, not the sender, because the two aren't always synonymous. Senders have multiple mailboxes. So this will go one level deeper. Resources aren't something to be treated lightly in a migration, especially if you're a large organization. Now, your first such option is ingest first, then migrate into Exchange. I'm sorry, it's just a bad idea. The process needs to be a parallel one, which is how most software solutions handle it. They're going to consolidate PST data onto a central server and then proceed to migrate all that data into Exchange Online. Now, this is a simultaneous process, but you will need additional storage. Obviously, it's temporary, because the PSD data is being staged. The other option is to migrate it directly, and this is how C2C's PSD Enterprise works. The IT organization simply chooses to have PSD Enterprise migrate directly into the Exchange Online archive box, as is displayed in the screen above. When you're doing this, there's no consolidation effort required, and there isn't any temporary storage data for PSD data either, because it's not been staged. It's a direct process. The third key aspect you need to worry about is bandwidth. Any migration can proceed only as fast as your internet connections. And you need to be mindful of the fact that Microsoft is going to throttle back a migration to make sure that the overall Exchange environment isn't compromised. So these aren't going to occur in the blink of an eye. They could take a while. And you could be looking at weeks, even months. Now, third parties who consolidate PST data and then migrating it are utilizing what's called a multi-hop process. Each consolidation server is a single connection into Exchange, and this can slow down the migration process. By contrast, PST Enterprise makes use of existing Exchange connections so that there is a direct connection. In the case of larger organizations, it becomes a many-to-many group of connections. So a lot of those bandwidth issues are eliminated. Finally, the important thing to keep in mind is you need to finish the job. Once the data from the PST files has been migrated, they should be deleted. If you don't delete them as part of the project, they're going to be hanging around forever and they have no real use. Then if a user finds one of these files, you're going to get questions, how come they can't access their cherished PST files, even though you've explained in great length that you've migrated them into their mailbox, and it goes on and on and on. Worse, they're going to continue to consume storage space and resources. The other thing that is equally important is to remove the capability for users to create new PST files. This is an administrative function. Basically, with Exchange 2013, and particularly Exchange Online, the user should have no need for a PST file. You should feel pretty confident in flipping that switch and making sure they never, ever, ever do it again. And for any company planning a migration, preparation is going to be critical. The companies are going to need to identify the scope. How big is the problem? They're going to need to evaluate any third-party tools carefully. Are they straightforward? Do they do the job? Are they something you can deploy? You need to line up your resources before you start. This is not only going to ensure that you have the infrastructure and the bandwidth, but you also have the buy-in. If there's a hiccup here and there, or suddenly somebody can't get their file, whatever, there's going to be some timing involved. This is not an upgrade, it's a migration. And that's the final piece, is you have to be realistic. These PST files didn't create themselves overnight, and they're not going to disappear overnight either. Now, in our experience, customers have found that migrations take longer than they anticipated, often twice as long, and cost twice as much as they were budgeted for, because, again, these projects don't run themselves, and even if you have the most highly automated, well-thought-out migration plan, you're going to need to manage it, and you're also going to need to manage users' expectations. I mean, the great caveat is you only have to do this once. We'd also like to invite everyone who's attended this to look at C2C's Quick Start version of our PS Enterprise solution. And you can get your own very own license to kill PSTs. This is going to support up to 100 mailboxes, and it's going to be valid for 100 days after activation, and there's no charge. All of the supporting prerequisites, the instructions, the manuals, the links to the self-service support forum are all on the License to Kill website, and that's www.c2c.com, License to Kill. Now, alongside this, we provide a one-day springboard service, which is a small fee, which is designed to get you up and running with PST Enterprise. Now, if you need a proof of concept, we can certainly get that arranged, and again, it's very straightforward. Crystal, who introduced me, has done several of these, and they're very quick. Also, on our website, www.c2c.com, you will find a lot of information about PST Enterprise. You'll find a 60-second overview video. You'll see data sheets. You'll see more product information, and there's even a full 15-minute demonstration of the product. So that concludes the information we wanted to go through, and now we would like to open it up for questions. And Crystal, I believe there were a few here.
Yes, let's start with this gentleman. If you migrate multiple PST files that have the same data on them, is C2C able to recognize the duplicate data and only migrate one copy? Or will it create an archive with the duplicate data?
Thanks. Actually, that is a very good question, and one we wrestled with. What we found was that most people, believe it or not, want the data in the same format that they were used to accessing it. So we will not recognize the duplicate data. We will move it exactly as it's found. The reason for doing this is pretty simple, that people, like it or not, have turned around and started to see PST files as, quote-unquote, a file folder process. They set up a whole hierarchy of PST name folders over to the left-hand side of their Outlook, and they drag and drop things into them, and suddenly they, wow, okay, I've saved this in multiple places. So if you turn around and you go ahead and get rid of data, believe it or not, you're going to have end users contacting you and saying, hey, how come this isn't in my such and such folder? Because one of the things, as I probably should have explained, when you're migrating PST data, most of the automated tools, and C2C is no exception, we will recreate that whole hierarchy of PST folders just like the user had before.
Fantastic. And another question?
Yep.
Can I do all of these same functions with Archive 1 Enterprise?
And actually, I believe you can. PST Enterprise was actually extracted from Archive 1 Enterprise as a subset because we found a variety of customers wanted the PST features, but basically we're no longer going to use the archiving. So the answer to that is yes.
And another question here. If I started a project with PST Capture, can I finish it with PST Enterprise?
Yes, you can. The caveat is you're probably going to want to go back and rerun PST Enterprise just so you can identify those PST files that you've already moved, and then you can turn around and delete them. And
I think we addressed this one, but let's answer it anyways. What if the owner of the PST file is no longer with our company?
Okay, yes, actually we did address that, and typically that ends up an orphan file, where the file is sitting there and it has no visible owner. Like I explained before, what PST Enterprise will do is it uses a variety of algorithms, so it will determine who that file belongs to, even if they no longer exist in any of the other solutions.
If you migrate multiple PST files, oh, no, that's a duplicate. I apologize. I think we have quite a few questions, so this is great. Thank you. Oh, here's another one here. My PST project is temp. Can I rent this versus purchasing, as we're only dumping the PSTs to Office 365?
And the answer is, of course. We do offer a rental model. We set it out typically for a year. And some people are successful in moving them all within a year, and believe it or not, some aren't. So yes, you can rent this product, because typically you are only going to use it for a year or two, and then you're done with it. However, if you're doing something like VDI, where you're implementing a virtual desktop, you're still going to have PST files. Your whole idea is, well, I'm going to let people create them, but I'm going to make them centralized. So in that case, you probably want to run it. But yes, you can rent it. All right. Do we have one more question?
Yes. One last question here. It looks like they just finished typing this in. Can you handle password-protected PST files?
Good question, and yes, we can. That's another issue that some of the other third-party tools struggle with. Obviously you're going to need to provide the password and all of those details, but yes, we can handle that. All right, and I think that's all of the questions we had today. We thank everybody for attending. We welcome you to go to www.c2c.com/license to kill. It's actually a pretty cute website. Kudos to our marketing team. And you will be able to download this 100 mailbox version of PST Enterprise and certainly see how it's going to perform yourself. And we look forward to sending out the link to the webinar. And if you have questions, please get back to us. And thank you again for taking part of your afternoon out to hear about what to do about PST files.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and thank you, Rich.